Hello and welcome to Found in Translation, a weekly-ish exploration of one fellow's translation of the Christian scriptures, one chapter or two at a time. I'm Brandon Rhodes, and across the internet from me is the translator himself, Brandon Johnson. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, Brandon.
And also across the internet from both Brandons is our guest co-host today. This is Aaron J. Smith. Say hi.
Hi.
Let people know about yourself.
Yeah. I've been friends with the translator Brandon for a long time. And I've been friends with the other Brandon for quite a little bit of time as well. I'm the host of a podcast called All Things Made New. We talk about the Christian spirituality of being human. I also write about that topic on my blog over at aaronjsmith.net. I am a writer, a theologian, a spiritual director, and a human. And that's the best. Oh, I like cookies. That's the most important thing to say. So, yeah.
Favorite kind of cookie?
Uh, my wife's sugar cookies.
Mm-hmm.
Like soft, a little crunchy on the outside, delicious. Yeah, that's the way to go.
Least favorite kind of cookie?
That's hard.
Do you just pass over a snickerdoodle every time? Probably not if you like sugar cookies, but
No, I love snickerdoodles. There's not a cookie you can put in front of me that I don't like. I'll even eat oatmeal raisin cookies. Like I am
Yeah.
all over the place. This is yeah.
As long as I know that's what it is before I take a bite. Like the worst thing is thinking they're chocolate chips and discovering that they're raisins. Like,
Oh yeah.
but if I know what I'm getting into, I can enjoy that too.
Yeah.
oatmeal raisin are in my top three.
Yeah.
But we will not cookie shame here.
No.
No. We are going to be talking about Matthew 1 and 2. Most of the season, we're going to be hitting just one chapter at a time. But this is a lot of kind of historic throat clearing, and most of chapter 1 is a list of names. So we figured let's just dive right into it and talk about both of these chapters. So, to give you a quick summary of what's going on here, we will be reading little excerpts of it. But to give you a sense of what's going on, if you haven't read it online yourself, which you should, that is available at litbible.net. And then you can hit the read button and search for Matthew from there. But Matthew 1 is going to be here's a list of the origin story of Jesus, and then like ancestrally, culminating in Mary and Joseph. And then in Matthew 2, we get into a bit more of the birth story, a lot of the Christmas stories, the Zoroastrian scholars visiting him, and Herod freaking out and conspiring to kill as many babies as he has to in hopes of getting that one. So, really happy reading we have to start the season. um,
Mhm.
but yeah, with that, let's just start walking on through it. Um, what what jumps out to you, y'all?
Yeah. I mean, starting right at the beginning of that that genealogy. Um, yeah, I don't want to read it all because it's like you said, it's a long list of names. But if we uh, verse 17, and it talks about there are 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the forced relocation to Babylon, and 14 from the forced relocation to Babylon to the Messiah. Uh, it's a little bit difficult to see because it's in the three groups of 14. But what that also is six groups of seven, and which there is we've talked about this in the first time we talked about Matthew, but it's that Leviticus reference of the generations are like the years leading to Jubilee, seven groups of seven. At the seventh, after the seventh, there's a Jubilee where everything is restored, everything was reset so that everything can be good for everybody. Reminds me of the name of your podcast, Aaron, All Things Made New. Um,
And that's
so
more
I
that's
think,
more layered than it being like Jews sure love the number seven. Look,
Right,
he's
right.
7 times 7. He's the most Jewish guy. It's like,
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, this is about if we let things just go as they will based on status quo kinds of things, people are gonna like inequalities just keep growing, right? And so the rich get richer, the poor become more oppressed. And so there's an intentional reset that has to happen in order to make sure it's good for everybody. A redistribution of wealth, if you will, which is very biblical, in fact. Um, and
And
what's interesting to, oh yeah,
that redistribution of wealth, I just want to point out it also includes the land. Like the
yeah,
land goes back to the people and the families that originally owned it. And that's
mm,
something that like we Christians like to talk about Jubilee, like in leftist space. We like to talk about Jubilee as like, the big thing of like this is going to happen for us. This is going to eventually God's going to bring this about, and eventually everything's going to be made right. The oppressed are going to be set
hmm
free and things like that. But they don't think about the land that has been taken.
hmm
That has been taken from the indigenous tribes here in the U.S. Everywhere where colonialism touches, land has been claimed, and land belongs not to private people, but to itself. And so there's also a
hmm
sense of the land being given that rest with the harvest not happening for that year, and the land just
yeah,
given a rest from work. So it's good to point out that this isn't just good for people, but it's good for creation.
hmm absolutely. Yeah, it makes me think of land back, the phrase that indigenous folks put on signs and have as kind
Yeah.
of the uh, slogan for like making things right for not just everyone, but everything.
the land is also a participant in the covenant, in how God's love is known and assured and shown. It's um, to not have access to the land. I mean, it's the means of production. It's the means of
hmm
production, and it's the means in the ancient imagination of knowing God's provision. I mean, when Jesus in a few
Yeah.
chapters um, talks about like why we should love our enemies, he reminds them, look, the rain falls on the land where these characters are and those guys. Um,
Mhm.
so to be assured of a place in the land is to be assured of your place in God in no small part, in the
Mhm.
family.
Yeah, and then you
Yeah,
have the exile happening where they became where the Israelites became the oppressed people because they had participated so heavily in oppression.
right.
Land was taken from them because, like you pointed out, Brandon, it's part of the covenant, and they broke the covenant. So made God let the results of the broken covenant catch up with them,
Hmm.
and they lost the land for a while,
Mhm.
and they never really fully got it back. I mean,
Yeah.
it went from what Persia to Assyria to
Babylon.
Greek, Rome. It ended up in Rome, and it's just been a
Yeah.
long line of
All
being
of those
passed
along the
down.
way. Yep.
Yeah, a long line of being passed down from power to power to power to power, and the Israelites living under the thumb of their oppressor.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. And like you said, that was the Babylonian exile was is framed as the natural consequence of Israel trying to live as empire, as the
Yeah,
oppressors, building a world, or not building, but being complicit and joining in with the world where dominating others is the way to find security, rather than what they were called
Hmm.
to undermine that whole system. And it's like, well, you didn't do anything to change the system, so the system is going to do what it does. And here you go.
F around and find out is the jaded way
Mm-hmm.
of putting it.
Yeah. So, so yeah, I see all of that, like those themes. Like, I don't know if we want to call Abraham an immigrant, but we have potentially immigrant Abraham to David, who was seen as the liberator from uh, Philistine oppression at the time. And then between David and the relocation to Babylon, they became the oppressors and then received more oppression and then were liberated, but didn't quite seem to get it. Like thinking about this morning, actually, Ezra and Nehemiah, a lot of evangelicals like to use those two books as the like here's the example of what good Christian leadership should be like. And it's like, no,
Mm-mm.
they kept doing the opposite of the calling to be the light to the world. Instead, they kept trying to hold purity boundaries of separating themselves from.
Hey, we lost Brandon Johnson there, so back to it. You were talking about Ezra and Nehemiah.
Yeah. So yeah, this the part of the between the forced relocation to Babylon and the Messiah, there is a restoration there, a liberation that happens, but it also doesn't really fully reset back to being good for everybody. The Ezra and Nehemiah, it comes to mind like that got used in my seminary time by like professors as the example of what good Christian leadership should be like, but it's so counter to the message of Christ. The calling of Israel, even at the time, to be the light to the nations, to fulfill the promise to Abraham, uh, and because it's still all about making sure there is separation. We don't want to mix with those other people. We want to isolate ourselves and exclude those other people as the means of making sure we're being really faithful, which misses the point of what being faithful is actually to include everyone. Um, so I think that is part of the message of this is, yeah, there's these kind of ups and downs along the way, which fits with the Jubilee pattern of every 7 years. There's the sabbatical where the land gets a rest and people who are enslaved for debt get to be released from that debt in that way. But then there's the things are still problematic. So every 50 years, every sets of seven, and then the year after that, the 50th year, there's this jubilee. It's this major restoration, and that's what this is looking forward to. And what's interesting to me is that Jesus isn't at the jubilee year, isn't at the 50th generation. It's at the end of the sixth set of six. And I think that's implying that the church becomes that seventh set of seven that leads to the Jubilee.
Mm-hmm. It is remarkable to read Ezra and Nehemiah and this side of evangelicalism. And man, they read as Christian nationalists. They
Yeah.
read with a fixation on a certain kind of piety that is exclusionary, um, that misses the like the prophets and Torah within the narrative, within the chronology that the Bible provides, apart from what actually happened, but within the chronology of the canon, Torah and the prophets are pretty clear how you treat immigrants, how you treat the poor, and where you find your security. These are the things that you need to be always mindful of, um, or else you are relocated, you're exiled.
Mhm.
And you're going to be kicked out of the land. It's the terms of the rental agreement. It also uses a lot
Mhm.
of language of idolatry. It's worth noting that, like, idolatry in that imagination had in part to do with, putting spreading your chips across a few different places. Like, you want to cover your, like, betting arrangement
Like
for,
hedging your bets. Yeah.
yeah, hedging your bets. Like, you want to be
Yeah.
making sure whichever God is actually going to be giving us rain and children that make it past age 3, um, and keep us out of the gaze of invaders. You want to make sure that, like, hey, whoever it is that's able to do that, do it. Like, there is a component of national um, strength behind, like a toxic form of, like, trying to meet your needs that's
Mm.
in idolatry. So Ezra and Nehemiah aren't saying anything, or they're not doing anything about what the prophets and the Torah say to do. Instead, they double down on this stuff. So yeah, I love your point of, like, that's a waypoint on the way towards Jesus and the Jesus movement that becomes that 50th generation,
Mhm.
where, like, don't settle for Ezra or Nehemiah, man. Like, they got a few things square and but kosher. But holy shit, they doubled down on some of the wrong things at the same time.
Mhm.
One thing that literary Matthew does in the genealogy is move us forward. One
Hmm.
thing that Ezra and Nehemiah do is look backward. They're like, how can we restore our former glory?
Yeah.
Matthew looks ahead and says, how are we being released from our deviations? I mean, it even says it in verse 21. She will give birth to a son. You will name him Jesus because he'll restore his people from their deviations. There's that restoration piece, but not restoration to the time of David, but a restoration from deviation, a restoration from
Mm.
everything, the power systems of oppression that have invaded us, that have taken root in us, our own moral failings because of how we've been socialized and because of our own traumas, um, liberation from the effects of trauma that it has on community. Like, this is the promise that Mary gets at the Annunciation. And this is the promise that Matthew is highlighting by saying Jesus is the fulfillment of these things to move us into Jubilee. Because Jubilee
Mhm.
couldn't happen without the Day of Atonement, which was an absolution of deviation in Torah, right?
Right.
So
Right.
Jesus is that atoning sacrifice that moves us forward into Jubilee because we are absolved and we are, like it says here, we are restored from our deviations.
Mhm.
And that's a piece that I think people miss um, when you talk about like Christian nationalist leaders and stuff like that. People just want to overthrow and stop them rather than say, how are we complicit in
Mhm.
this, even by just sitting aside and saying, well, it's not really affecting me until it does. That's still complicit in deviations. That's still complicit
Right.
in this whole cycle of pain and sorrow and oppression that continues to happen over and over and over. Then now the church, instead of being Jubilee, the church is on its way to exile because we're in the time of Ahab instead of the time of what was his name? Jeroboam? I forget all the kings. But instead
There's
of the
lots of
time
them.
of like, yeah, instead of the time of like turning back away from idolatry, we're turning Christian nationalism into idolatry, like hedging our bets that way. Like, what's going to really, what's going to be
Mhm.
most beneficial for America first? That's what it's
Mhm.
coming down to.
And specific groups within America, even. But yeah,
Oh yeah, no, totally, totally. Because America First is a complete dog whistle for patriarchy and white supremacism.
Yeah, idolatry is not only metaphysical infidelity, right? Like
Mhm.
right, right,
we pinch the incense to the wrong name for the
yeah,
wrong sky god. Um, trust in military conquest is a form of idolatry. Hoping in the invisible hand of the market is a form of idolatry. And the problem with these things, in addition to there being no kind of there, is it there's a human suffering component to it.
right.
We are formed in the wrong image when we place our trust and hope there. And I think that's the punchline to it. Like if seminaries or churches are going to form people to not be unfaithful to the divine as we've known it in the face of Jesus and in the Yahweh story. It means not, it doesn't primarily mean don't be tempted by Islam or Buddhism or whatever other quote unquote religion. Like, actually, we need to be including MAGA
Yeah,
in the category of religion. We need to
yeah.
be, I mean, a certain toxic form of patriotism or nationalism, which is most forms, I think, um, is idolatry. I believe in really a hierarchical world that if we adhere to it, it will put the world right side up, i.e., there's only straight people, or male above female,
Mhm.
or cis over het, or white over on down the line, English speaking. That's idolatry.
Mhm.
And those are the kind of deviations that those are, I think, nearer the center of the kind of deviations that this Jesus is being brought to deliver us from.
Yeah, yeah. That all makes me think of some of N.T. Wright's work,
Mm,
where he really clarifies that the problem with idolatry isn't that it's putting statues as more important than God. It's that there is already an idol. The image of God is that word is the same word as the image is the same word as idol in the original. Humans are the statues that represent God. And so putting
Mhm.
anything above humans is the problem. It gets in between us and God when we're supposed to be like how people did idol worship when it was about statues was they would feed and care for and take care of these statues as symbolizing their allegiance and care for the deity that it represented. That's what we're supposed to be doing as Yahweh worshipers is caring for and feeding and taking care of the idols, the image of God, other humans.
mm,
And
Yeah.
that's how we show our faithfulness to God.
And when even political ideology gets in between us and that mission, that calling, that let's call it duty. When political ideology gets in between us and that duty to care for the other people, it is just as valid an idol as Moloch or as Baal or as Asherah or anyone that led Israel away from this concept of we are working towards Jubilee, so we are going to be just and fair because the day is going to come when justice and fairness triumphs.
That becomes the new status quo because we've worked to build it.
Yeah.
And it begins with an unmarried girl in a
Yep.
patriarchal society.
Yep.
Or it comes
Yeah.
into
I love that.
focus here.
Yeah. I love that that's the first story is already about giving justice to an oppressed person in an oppressive society. This Miriam is how I have it translated. It's Mary. Miriam is this the more Hebraic version of the same name, trying to emphasize the original roots of this thing as being Jewish. Um, but yeah, she's easily discarded by Joseph, and God shows up and says, "Hey, don't use your privilege to hurt her. Like, do right by her. Show her my love. Represent me and treat her as the image of God. Care for her as you would care for me, and stay with her because I am in her in a lot of ways right now. Right.
Yeah. And even though Joseph was going to, how do you have it translated here? Was going to be her husband. He did not want to publicly humiliate her, so he intended to sever the marriage agreement with her privately, even though
Mm-hmm.
he was going to give her that courtesy and do it in a, you could say, loving fashion. It still would have
At
left
least nice,
bereft.
nicer.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, nicer. It still would have left her bereft. Like her then family has to take care of her, and she is shamed in society. And how does her son grow up with no claim to anything whatsoever? And that starts
Mm-hmm.
generational trauma.
Right.
I mean, that starts this whole cycle of Mary was in poverty, so her son would be in poverty, so his family would be in poverty, so his children would be in poverty, and it just starts this whole cycle
Right.
that trickle down economics doesn't fix because it doesn't work. So you can't
Right.
just say, hey, we are going to let the rich get richer and it'll eventually help the poor. When this is a great example of if God had not intervened, this would have started a generational cycle that would have gone on as least as long as the generations that Matthew just listed.
Well, where does this lead us? Let's move on to the next chapter.
Turn in your online Bibles with us to Matthew 2.
So now we have the Zoroastrian priestly scholars.
Yeah, who the hell are
Yeah.
they, dude?
Yeah,
Tell us more.
it's where you might be more used to seeing magi, which is the term for the Zoroastrian priestly class. Um, but so it's not just like a magician, it's this Persian religion of Zoroastrianism. And there's this whole class of priestly scholars that live there, and that's what they're called as magi, magus, not maga. Uh, and so to make that really clear, like these are foreign people with a foreign religion who manage to notice what's going on in God's work here with the Messiah before any of the people who are supposed to be looking for it.
And they don't just look for it in their own culture. That's the thing. Like they're not just like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
here's a sign in the heavens about a Jewish king. Well, it doesn't have anything to do with me. They really are looking at this in a very globally cosmopolitan way of the rise of kings and nations affect our nation. So we should pay attention to this. And in this case, it's positive, but in some cases, it's not. Like our recent election, that's going to have global consequences. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not,
Yeah, I mean they always do,
yeah,
because
yeah.
we're yeah.
But people don't think that. People think that as long as it just affects, like they think like is as long as it doesn't happen in my country, it's not going to affect me.
Mhm.
Instead of looking at, I mean, God's promises for all people, right? All people to come and to know God and to find blessing. All people, Jews, Gentiles, the world. So it's not enough to say, hey, it doesn't affect me, so I don't have to care about them. I don't have to care about the refugees. I don't have to care about the immigrants. I don't have to care about people that are getting here undocumented because they don't have anywhere else to go or because they're trying to better their lives. I don't have to care about them because it doesn't affect, ultimately, doesn't affect me.
Right.
These magi, the Zoroastrian priestly scholars here, they showed up unexpectedly, but they still showed up. They showed
Mhm.
up looking for something that was of global consequence because they understood that this was a big deal.
Yeah.
They didn't know the whole story of like of the Holy Ghost overshadowing Mary and Joseph not turning her away. They didn't know that whole story. All they knew was there was some sort of cosmic event that was telling them that royalty was rising in Judea, which is under Roman rule,
Mhm.
and they're going to tramp through the Roman Empire to go and see this king.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me to notice that it's these foreigners from another religion who are able to read the signs and want to be faithful. And then if you come down
Yeah.
to like, yeah, the King Herod supposed to be representing Judea and Israel, Judea in this context, uh, is agitated by it instead, right? Rather than on board and faithful. And then you have him asking the Bible scholars, what does it say about it? And then they quote Micah here. And what's fascinating to me about this quote
Can
is
you read the
that
quote as well?
yes, yeah. So he asks where the Messiah was supposed to be born. And then they say, in Bethlehem in Judea, since this is how it's written by the prophet Micah. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not at all least among the leaders of Judah, because a leader will come from you who will care for my people Israel. So that's how they quote it, but that's not what it says. Uh, what it actually says is, and you, Bethlehem of Ephrath, which means the ash heap, the least of Judah's clans, as opposed to not the least. From you shall one come forth from me to be ruler of Israel, whose origins are from ancient times, from days of yore. Therefore he shall give them over till the time with woman in labor bears her child, and the rest of his brothers shall come back from the Israelites. He shall stand and shepherd them by the might of the Lord, by the pride of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall dwell secure, and then shall he be great to the ends of the earth. They change it to be flattering and non-threatening. They leave off the part where he's going to be great to the ends of the earth, and they change it so that Bethlehem in the land of Judah is a positive thing. The first time we see the religious leaders in Matthew, they are intentionally misquoting scripture to placate the oppressor.
Come on.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah, yeah, they're mishandling what they have been given in order to not only placate but to keep themselves safe. Because I mean,
Right.
it does.
Right.
I mean, to be fair, it says Herod was agitated, and what was it? I'm on the wrong screen.
All of
Herod was
Jerusalem was on
agitated, and all
edge or
Jerusalem was agitated with him. So
Mhm.
like, so Herod's got some power, and they
A little
respond
bit.
out of fear.
Right.
I mean, Herod can kill them. So they're like,
And
let's save our own
in fact, he
skins.
does start killing people. Yeah.
He does. Yes, yes, yes. This is what he's most famously known for. Um, but they're like, let's save our own skins and let's flatter him and let's tone this down so that the promise of Messiah, the hope of Israel, can coexist with Herod. So that
Yeah.
God's new creation can coexist with the world's empire.
Mhm. Yeah. So rather than being a light to the nations, much more like the Zoroastrian priestly scholars, the the scribes, the Bible scholars, the ones in charge of maintaining the scriptures and studying and sharing what they say, side with empire, are complicit with the oppressor for their own gain,
And they bend
for
their
their own
religion and their
security.
sacred stories to stay in
Mm-hmm.
power, to not piss
Right.
off the guy with the sword.
Right.
They lie and use their religion to save their uh, seat at the devil's table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is so familiar, like so much of the Christianity that I've been exposed to, that I see constantly, is placating the authority figures, the oppressors, the authoritarian regimes, the abusive leaders, the just prioritizes power over others and placating those who want power over others as the means for security.
And within the context of this story, just pairing that with your observation of like the first people to seek and discern Christ are the wrong people, the wrong
Mm-hmm.
kings, pagans, right? Um, like an ongoing habit that I've been trying to let settle in has been following on this disposition in like I think it's in both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian scriptures, but really throughout these gospel stories, is that the good thing happens from the wrong place, the
Mm-hmm.
wrong people,
Constantly. Yeah.
and Christ's favorite lyric from his community's songbook is the stone the builder rejected has become the cornerstone.
Mm-hmm.
That the way forward, the mantle, the foundation is gonna be the wrong thing, quote unquote, according to the people with comfort and power. That's a
Right.
general hermeneutic or lens you can look at not just the Bible through, but where does true power reside and where does the divine generally try to let light in? And
Mm-hmm.
if those, I mean, I get why those religious leaders didn't want to lose their power, didn't want to die. They're trying to protect their people. They're trying, I like giving them a generous interpretation. They're trying to not cause this volatile shithead in power, sounds familiar, to cause harm to people. Like
But
to
the
the
reader
people that they're
understand.
that they're supposed to be shepherding. Yeah, like they do want their own power and they have their own delusions. But if they if that lens, if that way of holding the story, it's a theme in the Jewish scriptures of like, hang on, wait a minute. Shouldn't I stay curious and not judgmental when pagans are coming to declare a baby in the wrong town, in an unimpressive town? Like those are all. It's not just a fulfillment of scripture of like checking boxes. It's a fulfillment of the energy of scripture, of the basic like heart of how the story is told. Of like, are you getting
Right.
it? It's coming from the wrong places.
Hmm.
And that's a paradoxical checking of the big box.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think of the promise to Abraham, through you, all people groups will be praised. Like this story is about very much the right people, this people, not being praiseworthy, and other peoples from other nations being the praiseworthy ones here.
Mhm. And it's also a fulfillment out of the chronology that they had expected. They expect the Messiah to kick the shit out of some Romans, and then they'll be ascendant, and then all nations will come to them. And here we are. He's still like he's still shitting himself. And the first gen and the Gentiles are already coming and flocking to um, the newborn king.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is not through power, but vulnerability and hospitality. Tell that to
Yeah.
Herod.
It's just this
Well,
whole like,
I don't think he
I
likes it.
mean, I mean, this is a great example of the scarcity mindset, you know? There's not
Mhm.
enough to go around. So Herod has to clutch what little he has that the emperor or whoever is directly above him could take away from him. So he has to
Mhm.
clutch onto it super hard. And so the people that are in power under him have to clutch onto their power super hard. And all of this, like you said, Brandon, is being overturned by a baby in the wrong town, born to the wrong girl. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, everything about this story is like this isn't the hero's journey that, that Joseph Campbell lays out. This is something completely different, completely new, and it threatens all of those people that are hanging on to power because they believe it to be scarce. They're hanging on to their
Mhm.
resources because they're like, there's not enough to go around, so I have to get my own. I have to keep my own. I have to hang on to this. I have to do everything I can to look out for who I am and my own.
Mhm.
And that's it.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the message of all of this is that the scarcity is real, but it's fabricated. Like it's
Yeah.
because of it's assumed, so people act on it, ends up creating it. People hoard the power and hoard the resources
It's
that
interesting.
then creates scarcity for everyone else. So everyone then has to try to forcibly take back for themselves. And you just have all this competition of people trying to hoard in all directions that makes it so that there's not enough to go around.
Yeah. And then here comes some Gentiles who lavish on gifts to
Mhm.
the wrong baby.
Very expensive gifts.
Right. To this little one that's in this little house, that's in this little town, but they listen to the message of blessing. They didn't care who this was because this was a blessed baby. This was a baby in the image of God. They might not have thought of it this way, but the truth is, here's another human in the image of God, so I'm going to care for this child
Mhm.
and give them what they deserve,
Yeah.
even though it doesn't do any good for the Zoroastrian scholars. It doesn't benefit them
Yeah.
in any way other than them
Not
fulfilling,
materially.
Right, not materially at all. It doesn't do anything for it doesn't even do anything for them religiously. Their
Does for
religion,
them for their humanity though.
oh, for their humanity, 100%. It turns them away from nationalism. It turns them away from scarcity. It turns them away from all these things, and they become more human by doing this. They
Mhm.
lean into their humanity by doing this. But from all outside purposes, like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So the story concludes. Anything more we want to explore on Herod's slaughtering of the innocents?
So yeah, this seems to really put the punctuation on this story. So it says when Herod realized he had been played by the Zoroastrian scholars, he was extremely enraged. He ordered the murder of all the children in Bethlehem and anywhere nearby, aged 2 years and under, based on the timing he had learned from the Zoroastrian scholars. That event acted out what Jeremiah the prophet said. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and endless wailing. Rachel wept in grief for her children, having no desire to be comforted because they were gone.
And that is a correct quote.
Yes.
That is scripture used correctly to point out the atrocities done by power.
Mhm. Yeah. In some ways, this part of it makes me have a little more compassion for the Bible scholars earlier in the story, right? Like they knew who they were dealing with. They
Yeah.
were scared. Yeah. All the stuff we've been talking about, the scarcity, the willingness to seek my gain by hurting the image of God
Mm.
is the way of the world, to use some more biblical language, right? Um, Whereas the Zoroastrians, the foreign members of another religion, are the ones actually fulfilling the calling of all humans of the way of Christ, of caring for the image of God at their own expense as the way to lead to Jubilee, to lead to connection and unity and goodness and well being for everyone.
Can I just say that this quote from Jeremiah just reminds me how powerless the parents were
Mm-hmm.
when Herod came in and did what he did. When Herod came in and just slaughtered the innocents, like how helpless they were, and their lament stands against that action and against the power that did that. Like this is a
Mm-hmm.
perfect example of, I mean, it said it earlier when Joseph had the dream and they went down to Egypt to prevent Jesus from being slaughtered in this slaughter. And then it was, I called my son to come out of Egypt through, what was that, Hosea? Yeah.
Yep.
Like this lament that Jeremiah talked in and is acted out here is a perfect example of people crying out to God because of oppression,
Mm-hmm.
just like the Israelites did in Egypt, and God brought them out of Egypt. So you have Jesus being brought out of Egypt, and you have this lament standing against power that God hears.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
That makes me
Herod
think
come.
like, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just saying that, I mean, the very next line after Herod came to his end, he doesn't even get a full like story about how he came to his
Right.
end. He's just a
Yep.
footnote in the story, but the lament rose against him and he came
Mhm.
to his end.
Yeah. Yeah. He was working so hard to protect his legacy.
Yeah.
And then all we have is that he murdered a bunch of babies. That's his
Yeah.
legacy. Yeah.
Wow.
It stands out to me from what you were saying and thinking about this here that lament itself is a subversive act of resistance. Being willing to name the horrors for what they are and refuse to be comforted, refuse to just say, put a silver lining on it or just move on and to say, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, well, it happened, but whatever, we're fine. No, standing up to say, this was horrific. This is wrong. This is worth grieving. And we're not going to just pretend it's okay, is an act of resistance.
Yeah.
This aggression will not stand, man. Yeah, I mean, there's a the contrast to the religious elites bending their sacred texts for their own ends is the simplicity of telling the truth about power and
Yeah.
violence and
Yeah.
the victims, the people on whose neck the boot or knee resides.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes you set aside for sacred purposes here, a
Right.
saint.
Yeah.
And then they dip out to Egypt.
Yeah. And then back in again. So,
It is good to note that Joseph wasn't stupid when he came back. Like when he heard that,
sure.
seriously,
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
you're
he
not
he
wrong.
hears, yeah, he hears about the successor, and he's like, let's go to Nazareth and not Bethlehem.
Yeah.
But I think that
Mm-hmm.
speaks something to non-violent resistance. We don't have to be stupid about things. We don't have to
Sure.
just
Yeah.
be martyred to be martyred. We don't have to just, but we can take care of ourselves to speak against power later. We can take care of ourselves
Mm-hmm.
to do what we need to do, but also we don't have to capitulate to the power to take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That
This is
fits
a perfect
so well with
example.
what we're seeing
Oh
throughout
yeah,
Matthew and how Jesus approaches things with constantly like the kind of veiled language
yeah,
against oppression so as not to provoke quite as strong of retaliation yet and not until he's ready. Uh,
yeah,
being smart about it, not being stupid about it, but still resisting.
Yeah, he's telling the
yeah,
truth, but slant.
Yeah.
yeah. It's the whole wise as serpents, gentle as doves bit. I mean, this is a great
Mm-hmm.
example of that, of just like, I know what I need to say, and I will say it in such a way that it doesn't incite violence unless I am ready for that violence to be incited. And there's a time and a
Mm-hmm.
place for that. I
Yeah.
mean, this lament is a time and a place to speak up, even though it could have caused more violence.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't always have to do that. We don't always have to play the martyr card in
Yeah.
order to
Right.
stand against injustice and oppression.
Right.
Yeah, God wants us to be alive if possible.
Mm-hmm.
You're not
Just
wrong.
yeah, just
Yeah.
scandalize those with the martyr complex. God does want you alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the first instance of if your message is not accepted there, kick the dust off your sandals and keep on walking.
Yeah.
Like he got that from Papa Joe here. Like, ain't going back to that shit. Let's try Nazareth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. So even
Hmm.
in these first two chapters where Jesus isn't even directly in it yet, right? Like so much about justice and oppression, inclusion, liberation, resistance to abuse of power, like so much.
Hmm.
Well, this is what Jesus inherited from
Yeah.
Joseph and Mary. He inherited standing against oppression. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this week we're recording. It's coming up to be the fourth week of Advent in year C in the lectionary, and that has the Magnificat. right?
Mm,
Like that's Mary's song of resistance, and she raised the Messiah. I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm sure that she wasn't just like, well, I'm not really going to talk about this anymore, but she probably did talk about how the oppressed have been laid low. She probably did think of this time of fleeing to Egypt as, a time of oppression, as a time of, you see what power does to people. And she
Mhm.
taught that to her son. And
Yeah.
Joseph taught that to his son. He didn't just teach him
Mhm.
carpentry, he taught him resisting and loving and caring for the oppressed. Just like he cared for Mary when he was told to by God, he
Mhm.
taught that to his son, to care for the oppressed, to care for. That's one reason I believe. I don't know if it says it in Matthew or not, but it says Jesus looked on the crowds and had compassion on them.
Mhm.
He was taught that. It wasn't just like because he was divine. There's a very human element to that. And in
Yeah.
doing so, he was resisting empire. In doing so, he was resisting the powers that be. In doing so, he was resisting the scarcity mindset. He was resisting patriarchy. He was resisting classism. He was resisting by having compassion.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what's that it's got to be over 20 years old now. The comedic voiceover over an old Jesus film where, it's like a film from the 70s or 80s and, here comes Jesus on camera and he sees the crowd and he says, "Look at all these sinners." That's
Oh,
not how he looked at people. Like
right, right.
Yeah.
he's got a gentle gaze. He has um compassion on what's going on. He has a sense of why this shit is so messed up and how
Yeah.
and what the human cost is. It's yeah, like you say, it's not like because there's these like halo beams coming out of his god eyes. It's because he's a human who in so fully bearing the image of God, his his gaze is one that sees suffering and feels it and is
Mhm.
it's felt to movement.
Yeah.
It's felt to action and to truth.
Yeah.
Mm, good stuff.
And that about wraps it up this week. We are all thankful for your company this leg of the journey. The easiest way to support Found in Translation is leave us a rating or a review on whatever app or player you've been enjoying this on, especially if that's on YouTube or Apple Podcasts. All the other algorithms worship at those things. So it makes it easier for more people to find the show. You can find us on Facebook as Found in Translation. You can read the Liberation and Inclusion translation at www.litbible.net. There's a link in the show notes for that. And you can follow its development on threads at lit.bible, Lit Bible. You can follow Brandon Johnson on threads as at Old Song New Dance and read more of his work at oldsongnewdance.com. You can follow me on threads as at BD Rhodes. You can also follow Aaron Smith at aaronjsmith.net or find his podcast, All Things Made New with Aaron J. Smith, wherever fine podcasts are found. The music you're listening to is by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Found in Translation was produced on unceded Chinook and Kalapuya land. Goodbye, Aaron, and goodbye, Brandon.
Hi, Brandon.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.